A great way to use up those shorter scrap cords is to incorporate them as textured rose knots into your macrame projects. Here and welcome to Bochiknot Macrame. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to turn those shorter scrap cords into rose knots for your macrame projects. One design element I really enjoy incorporating into my projects is in the form of texture. And with rose knots, not only are they cute little rosebuds, but they are textured knots that you can incorporate into almost any design. In this video tutorial, I'm going to be walking you through step by step on how to make a small wall hanging incorporating rose knots. This is a beginner-friendly project, so if you are just starting out with macrame, it is a great project to learn macrame with. And with that said, let's jump right in. So here I've gathered 3 different colors of leftover scrap cords that I have, and I wanted a similar color scheme, and that's why you see I have pinks and purples here. I like that I'm also using different types of scraps. So here is the recycled cotton scraps, and then on the left here is our leftover scraps from our bamboo cord. So our lush cord collection. It has a nice shine to it, which is great if you have something that's a little bit more matte and then you add something shiny in between. It does really make your designs pop. So I'll be using these scrap cords to make the rose knots. And then if you do have leftover cords from a previous project that you want to reuse and turn into a new project, but if not, you can use brand new cord for the body of your wall hanging. So you will need longer strands of cords for the body of the wall hanging. It is a very simplistic pattern, so you shouldn't need super long strands of cord. I will be using our 3mm 3-ply cord for this project. If you're a beginner, 3-ply or a very sturdy single strand is what I recommend you work with. This 3-ply cord is in the color Natural from our rainbow cord line. It is a super soft cord even though it is 3-ply, and that's what I really like about it, because it is pretty flexible and it's still really easy to work with and soft on your hands. You'll also need a 12-inch dowel. We are just making a small wall hanging, so a 12-inch dowel is sufficient for this project. So to begin the pattern, we're going to start with some longer strands of the natural cord, and we're going to use 190 centimeter long strands, which equates to about 75 inches in length. We're going to fold the strand of cord in half, and then we're going to attach it onto our dowel with a lark's head knot. So you take the loop in over top to the back, and then you take the vertical ends through the loop. You pull them through to tighten, and this is one lark's head knot. And so now what we're going to do is repeat this 21 more times with 21 strands of cord at the same length, and we're going to attach them right beside this one with lark's head knots. And then we'll come back here once that is done. Once all 22 strands of cord are attached onto the dowel, you can see here that I've spread it fairly evenly. They're sitting right beside each other, so they're not pushed together super tight. This is what we want. Okay, so to begin the pattern, we are going to start off with a row of square knots. Because we have an even number of cords attached onto the dowel, we'll be able to make a full row of consecutive square knots across. So I'm actually going to start on the right side with the far right 4 cords. To make a square knot, we use the outer left and right cords as the working cords. So I'm going to bring the left over to the right cord over, under, and through the left loop. And then we're going to pull on the cords to tighten. And then to finish the square knot, we're going to make an opposite half knot. So the opposite of what we just did. So taking the right cord over to the left cord over to the back and through the right loop. And then now we pull on the cord ends to tighten. And we have now made one square knot. So I'm going to take the next 4 cords over to the left. We're going to repeat the same thing. I like to pull on the anchor cords after every square knot, just so that if there are any loose cords or scrunched up cords above, you can remove that and straighten it out so that the knot looks nice and neat. Okay, so now taking 4 cords at a time, we're going to repeat this pattern all the way to the left side. So once we are done with our first row of square knots, we're now going to add a second row of square knots for this alternating square knot pattern. Now, it's called an alternating square knot pattern because the next row of square knots are going to be made in between 2 square knots with the row above. We're going to start in between these left 2 square knots. So I'm going to take the middle 4 cords here for a square knot. And then with 4 cords at a time, we're now going to make a consecutive row of square knots, stopping on the right side. And then once you're done with the last square knot here, you're going to have 2 cords left over on the right side, similar to what we have on the left. Once our second row of alternating square knots are made, we're going to start our third row. So same pattern, but this time we're starting with the far left 4 cords because we're going to go in between each of the square knots from the previous row. So we're going to take the far left 4 cords, make a square knot. Then we're going to continue this square knot row, 4 cords at a time, all the way to the right side. So here are the 3 rows of square knots that we have already made. We're going to add a few more before we start making the section where we add the rose knots. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add 4 more rows of square knots. Okay, so what we're going to do here now, once our 4 extra rows of square knots have been completed, we're going to start shaping our section where we're going to be adding the rose knots. So I like to have a nice little curvy pattern. Of course, if you want it to be a horizontal pattern, you can just go ahead by making a row of double half hitch knots here and then leaving a little bit of space, so about 2 inches, make another row of double half hitch knots. Now I'm going to be making a curved section. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start higher on this side and then I'm going to curve downwards and then I'm going to end up slightly lower on the left side. So to follow that pattern, I'm going to just start making square knots. So on the right side, I'm going to make the first square knot. And then I'm going to just continue with the full row to the left here. Okay, so we've added that full row of square knots across. Starting on the right side again, we're actually going to go diagonal. So skipping the far right square knot. Take the next 4 cords. We're going to make a square knot here. So we do have a slight diagonal line on the side. So as I said before, we're going to start high. We're going to go down a little. And then we're going to head back up here. So now we're also going to fill the rest of this row all the way to the left. Okay, we see a diagonal line on the right side. Now what we're going to do next is on the left side, we're going to end it here with a relatively straight line here. We're actually going to skip the far left 6 cords and start with the next 4 cords here for a square knot. And then we're going to continue this row all the way here. So now we can make an alternating row of square knots in between that last row of square knots we just made. So starting in between on the left and right sides, we're going to make that row of square knots across. Okay, after that added row, we're going to repeat the same pattern. So in between the last row we just made, make another row of alternating square knots. So if you want to know if you're ready to move on to the row of double half hitch knots, we're just going to take a approximately 47 centimeter long cord, and that equates to approximately 18.5 inches. And so I'm just going to place the cord underneath the pattern, which is kind of where we want the pattern to go for the row of double half hitch knots. So I said we're going to start high up here, we're going to go low, and then we're going to go back up here. So you see here we still have some double half hitch knots to make. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make another row of alternating square knots, and then we'll see how many more square knots we need to make after that. So we've added that row of square knots, and I'm going to place that cord on top again just to see where we're at with the pattern. I'd say we're about here. This is how it would look. Okay, so you see that we only really have one more row of square knots to make, but we're not going to make it all the way out here this time. As you can see, it's going to be like this. We're cutting it close here, which means we don't have much room there. Where we do actually have room to make square knots is right here in the middle. And so what we're going to do is, instead of starting on the far left and right sides, we're only going to add 2 square knots right here in the middle. So we're going to skip a square knot on both sides and start in between so that we only make 2 more square knots here. Okay, so you see here that we added the 2 square knots here. You can kind of see the pattern on the right side diagonal. We go down and then we go up and over to the left. Now there is a little bit of room here. It's not as gradual as we wanted because we can't fit a full square knot here. But what we're going to do is we're going to fit half a square knot. So we're just going to start the square knot like we normally would. Take the cord through, then tighten. And that's all we're going to make right there. And then we're going to do the same thing on the left side. Take those 4 cords. We're going to start and only make half of a square knot here. And then you can see it's a little bit more gradual. Okay, we are now ready to make the row of double half hitch knots. So making the first double half hitch knot for a row like this is a little bit tricky because you have nothing mounting the cord down. So what we're going to do is we're going to pin or tape down the left end here. Then starting with the far left cord end, we're going to bring it up over, weave it through to the left side, then tighten. This doesn't have to be super tight up against the square knot. We can have a little bit of space. Take the same working cord again, up through the left loop, and then we tighten again. Make sure that when we tighten, we're only pulling on the working cord and not the anchor cord. The anchor cord should be sitting nicely. So once you're done your first double half hitch knot, it's a lot easier to make the rest because it's already nice and sturdy on one side because there's a knot holding it in place. So now taking the next cord, we're going to repeat for another double half hitch knot. Make sure when you're tightening, only pull on the vertical working cord. So we're going to follow this pattern with the double half hitch knots from left all the way to the right side. So what I like to do after every few double half hitch knots, I pull on the anchor cord and kind of push and squish the knots that we have already made together to reduce the amount of space in between these double half hitch knots so that they look nice and neat. And so that we can fit a full row of double half hitch knots all across with all of the vertical cords. So now we're starting to head diagonally downwards. Okay, once we're done with this diagonal row of double half hitch knots, we're just going to continue with the more horizontal row of double half hitch knots, but we're actually going to do that small little dip and then we're going to round back up. So it's going to be more so like this. Make sure that this doesn't stick out too much. We do want to pull on it so that it's nice and snug. And then we're going to continue on with the double half hitch knots to the right. So we've curved all the way down. Now we're going to curve back up with a diagonal row of double half hitch knots all the way up. What we're going to do here now that we're complete with our full row of curvy double half hitch knots is we're going to make another row underneath, but this time we're going to leave a bit of space. because this is the section where we're going to be adding our rose knots. So I'm going to use a measuring tape just to measure approximately the length of the space. I think we're going to leave around maybe 1.5 inches. So starting on whichever side you like, I'm going to start left side this time, or right side this time. And then take the far right cord, bring it over through the right side, and then over and through the right side again. Now before we fully tighten, I'm just going to measure again. Yeah, it's about 1.5 inches. And then we're gonna hold that first half hitch knot, and then we're gonna tighten. Okay, now we are ready to make our row of double half hitch knots underneath. We're gonna consistently leave 1.5 inches all the way across. But I would say on the left side, we can leave a little bit more space, so it can be like this. Okay, once we are done with that second row of double half hitch knots, this is what the pattern should look like. You may have to do some adjusting and readjusting by pulling on the anchor cords to tighten the knots, and then if they're too tight, you might need to spread them apart evenly so that it does look even on both sides and one side's not sticking out farther than the other. And now we are ready to add our rose knots in the center here. So I'm going to put this to the side for now, and then I'm going to grab some scrap cords and I'm going to show you how to make a rose knot. So for rose knots, I like to use 14 to 17 inch long cords, which are about 26 to 43 centimeters. So I have them in 2 colors here. Now, if you have one that's slightly longer, it's good in that you can make another loop. So I'll show you what that means. So we're gonna fold a strand of cord in half, take the loop end with your index finger, start twisting it. We're gonna leave about 2 inches at the end on the other side. And then once you have twisted it together, we're gonna start wrapping it onto the opposite index finger. Then once you're done wrapping, we're going to slide it up. You can see that I wrapped it around twice, so that's what I mean by an extra loop. So we wrapped it around twice, slide it off the index finger and take that loop in right there. We're going to tuck it in underneath and pull it through the top. Then we're going to hold the top and then pull on the ends to tighten the knot. It's essentially an overhand knot, just a fancier version, and now we have a rose knot here. So I'm going to do the same thing with a slightly shorter cord, slightly thicker cord too. I don't think we're going to get 2 wraparounds, so we're just going to wrap it around the index finger. So yeah, we didn't get the full way to 2 rounds, but that's okay. We got 1 round, and then we're just going to take it off and then pull that loop end through, and then pull on the ends to tighten. Once done, this is what the rose knot looks like. So here you have it. We have some rose knots. And then now we're going to bring our pattern, our wall hanging, our pattern back. And what we're going to do to attach them onto the center part here is those 2 ends, we're going to make a square knot onto 2 loops here. So choosing anywhere on the middle section, we're going to pull up 2 loops. Those are going to be anchor cord loops. These ends here on the rows are going to be working cords for a square knot. So taking the left cord over, right cord over on top, we're going to thread it through underneath, thread it underneath the loops as well, and then pull it through on the left side, and then pull to tighten. Do want it fairly tight here so it will stay put, and then make an opposite half knot to finish the square knot. So right over to the left, left over top, tuck it underneath and through the right loop, and then pull to tighten. And now you can slide your rose knot up if you like, and then there you have it. We have now attached 1 rose knot. We can tuck cord ends to the back. So it seems like we're gonna have more than 1 or more than 2 rows of rose knots. We're gonna have a few rows of rose knots. That's okay. We're just going to be filling this section in with rose knots from our scrap cords. So we're gonna mix and match colors. You can mix and match whichever colors you like. So I'm just gonna take the next 2 cords right beside it, make a square knot with this purple rose. We're gonna tuck the ends through to the back. Okay, so I've made several more rose knots, if you can see. And then I'm just going to start attaching them alternating colors. For extra security, what we're going to do is similar to what we do with the square knots. So in between 2 rose knots, we're going to take the 2 loops in between to add a rose knot with a square knot. And then slide it up, and then tuck the ends to the back. You can continue on the left side here. We're actually just gonna add a rose knot. On the left here, actually, we're gonna add a rose knot here, the next 2 cords to the left. Then tuck the ends to the back. If it does get too hard to make the full square knots, if you're starting to run out of room, another way you can secure the rose knots onto the 2 loops here is with a simple double overhand knot at the back. Now you may want to start with this method from the get-go. That is totally okay. So I thread it through 2 loops side by side. Then we're going to turn it upside down. Then at the back, all we're going to do is just tie a double overhand knot. And then it's nice and secure. So now we're going to repeat these rose knots all the way to the sides until this entire section is filled up. Once the section is filled up with rose knots, this is what it should look like. They should be on there, attached pretty tight. For the majority of these rose knots, I did end up using the double overhand knot method of tying it. The square knots were just a little hard to make when you have a limited amount of space. We will now tidy up the rose knots at the back. As you can see, there's some longer strands sticking out and also on the sides as well. So we're going to turn it to the back side, and what we're going to do is trim down the double overhand knots. So we're going to trim down the fringe, and we're just going to clean it up a little bit so there's no longer strands sticking out at the bottom. If there are little strands sticking out still, that's okay. You don't want to cut super close to the double overhand knots because they can come undone. But we're just going to leave about 1 centimeter of the fringe left over. We are going to be adding a layer of fringe at the bottom so that it's thicker and it will cover any longer strands at the back. So if you do have smaller strands sticking out, that is totally okay. So we're gonna go through now and trim off the excess. Once cleaned up, this is what it should look like at the back. And it actually looks much cleaner on the front side as well. Now, if you want to just end the pattern here, we definitely can. You can trim off the ends and shape them however you'd like so that they are more even than what we have at the bottom here. But because there is a lot of spacing in between the fringe here, there's not a lot of volume of it. To make it look a little bit nicer, we're going to add a layer of fringe. This is great for those slightly longer scrap cords if you have any as well. What we're going to do is we're going to take another strand of 47 centimeter long cord, and we're just going to place it very close to the row right above. We're just leaving about 1 centimeter of space, and we're just going to make a row of double half hitch knots here. So now that the row of double half hitch knots is made, we can now start adding the fringe. Now the fringe isn't going to be super long. It depends on how long you want the wall hanging to be. So it actually might be a good idea for us to trim the bottom first so that we know how long we want the extra layer fringe. Now you can do a shorter top layer instead of the full layer to cover this bottom up here. I'm just going to do the same length so that we have a lot of volume on the fringe. So I'm going to cut probably around the length of the square knot pattern so that the rose knots sit nicely in the middle. So that's about here. So we're gonna cut off all of the excess after that. So we're just going to cut horizontal across, which it's about the length of the shortest cord here. We're just cutting off about 1 inch or 2. So we're gonna straighten it out. And there you have it, if you guys can see. So you can retrim it to make sure it's nice and straight, but we will wait until after the top layer fringe is added before we do that. So we're going to measure the length of the longest fringe, which is on the right side here. We're going to take the length and then we're going to double it for the layer fringe. So it's approximately 24 centimeters, so we'll need 48 centimeter cord lengths. So I actually already have some longer cord lengths. These are some leftover scrap cords I have. And then here are 2 strands. And then what we're going to do is through the loops, we're going to weave this cord through. So taking 1 strand of cord, we're going to weave it in between 2 loops. So taking 2 loops at a time, take the right end through the right side, and then the left through the left side. Because there's no loop on the left, we're just going to place it to the left. Then we're going to bring both cord ends through the back and up through the middle of the 2 loops. And then we're going to match the ends together to make sure they're even, and then pull to tighten. And then you should see a little loop right there. We're just going to repeat this all across 2 loops at a time. So I'm taking another strand, I'll show you again, on the left side, take the other end. So I have the next 2 loops here on the right side. And then we're going to push the cord ends through the middle of those 2 loops. So pull them through, match the ends, and then tighten. And there you go. We have started the layer of fringe on the left side. And now we're just going to repeat this all across. Once the layer of fringe is added, I'm going to turn it sideways so you can see. It is now looking voluminous at the bottom, and we can now shape the fringe. But before we do that, I'm just going to tuck in those side cords first. So typically if we have the anchor cords hanging out from the sides, you would use a crochet hook or weaving needle to weave them through the knots at the back. But because we have this middle section here with the rose knots, what I'm going to do is actually just tuck them inside the loops and then make a knot. So see here, I found an empty loop. I'm just going to tuck the left anchor cord in through like so. You just want to make sure you can't see at the front, and then I'm just going to tie a nice little knot here, and then that's it. So you can repeat this even for the last row. It's close enough so you can tuck it in through the loop. So do that on the rest of the anchor cords here. Once everything is tucked into the back side, we are going to trim the fringe. I'm actually going to trim the fringe similar to how we ended the last row of double half hitch knots. So just going to straighten everything out. I'm going to cut it higher up on the side. So I'm going to go like this way. And then we're going to go down. And then we're going to go back up on the other side. I'm going to trim it a little bit more, and then we'll come back and show you the final result. It's fairly subtle. Same with that last row of double half hitch knots. It's just a slight curve down and back up. So we have it here, diagonal, down, curve, back up on the other side. And we are now complete with the rose knot wall hanging. And that concludes our rose knot wall hanging projects with our new and improved way of attaching rose knots into your projects. Rose knots are what I call macrame add-ons onto a project, and for a lot of those smaller macrame knots or knot patterns, I generally use overhand knots to secure them onto a project. So if you do have a smaller knot pattern that you want to incorporate into a macrame project, overhand knots is the way to go. If you guys are interested in learning more macrame tips and techniques to advance your skill set, we do have an exclusive community on Patreon that focuses on this aspect. If you guys are interested in more information, head on over to patreon.com/Bochiknot. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a big thumbs up. Click that subscribe button so that you are up to date with our latest releases. And as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.